Hi, Glenn.
Hello, Anne. How are you?
Just great. Let's introduce ourselves first. I'm Ann Althouse at the University of Wisconsin Law School and the blog Althouse out here in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I am Glenn Loury. I teach economics at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island.
Great. Well, we have four topics we want to talk about today, and I'm kind of thinking about how they connect in some ways. Well, we'll see how we connect them up. But we want to talk about Herman Cain and the various charges against him, and Rick Perry and his oops moment and related things. Occupy Wall Street, and I like to call it Occupy bracketed your city because it's taken over the world apparently, and the Penn State issues.
That sounds like an agenda, yeah.
It sounds very heavy, but maybe we should we start with Perry? That's the lightest of the topics. We could maybe dispose of him. Is he out? Can we cross him off the list?
I'm amused at this practice in punditry land of somebody is toast, somebody is finished, let's declare it over, as if a presidential campaign could rise or fall and turn on one such moment. I mean, if he is finished, then he ought to have already been finished. Do you see what I mean? I don't know that I learned anything from the fact that this guy couldn't remember that third thing. Anyway, so I'm a little bit of a skeptic about this bandwagon of whatever. So I don't know if it's over. He's got a lot of money. The professionals tell me.
Right.
And he's going on a TV blitz and whatever. I also don't know if the gaffe, as I say, how much information I get from that. I mean, what's his IQ? Do I really know his IQ after I find out that he can't remember the third department? Or am I supposed to forget that he's been governor of Texas for a decade? I mean, So it sounds like the talking heads, and I guess I have to include us in that, have our thing, but the real rhythms of America's politics are something else altogether.
Well, it seems to me that people feel like Mitt Romney's going to get the nomination, but they're not ready to end all of the debate and discussion about who the nominee should be. It's too soon. It's too early to get married. We still need to play the field, and the field keeps falling apart on us. And Rick Perry was an important component of the field, or somebody has to play that role. But I think that the reason why it was so devastating to me was that there is this sense that maybe he's dumb, maybe he's not smart enough. And so even though you could have one big lapse like that and get away with it, the problem is a big obvious lapse that also confirms the suspicion that fits a pattern could be that's why it's devastating, that now we all have to face up to the fact that he really doesn't have the brains to be president. You have to be, maybe he can be governor of Texas, but you have to maybe reach a higher bar to be president of the United States.
Well, look, it doesn't look good. I'm not, going to say, oh no, he's really smart. I don't know that, and it doesn't look good. I mean, I ask myself, well, what was his thinking behind eliminating governmental departments? Didn't he start with their function? And so if he actually thought it through, even if he couldn't remember an arbitrary list of names, he ought to be able to remember the functioning parts of government that he doesn't think should be there.
Right.
So it did make me think that someone handed him a list of talking points and he just couldn't remember what to read off of the list.
Right, when he was trying to remember it, he would go back to the beginning of the list like a kid, like he had to go back to the start to try to do the mem. But if all he has is a list to remember and he doesn't have any depth to why he wants to eliminate these departments, this sort of Texan, tough guy, gunslinger, I'm going to come in there and do what's right, image is scary because he doesn't have any idea what he's doing. I mean, as he began that 53 seconds, he had this total masculine, tough guy attitude. He says, and I will tell you, it's 3 agencies of government when I get in there that are gone. And he sounded super tough. Then he couldn't name them, and by the end of the 53 minutes, he'd gone all week. So he'd gone from this peak of masculine authority to just dribbling down into almost a schoolgirl oops.
And I think
it was really very striking in that view.
I think I detect the theme that's going to unify these various subjects.
I got my themes.
Has something to do with masculinity or hypermasculinity, does it? Let me address this issue about dumbness, because I really I want to resist that. I don't know what his IQ is, but I think there's something really arrogant about us people in the academy who wax eloquent for a living. I mean, we could, make up a more or less cogent speech about any arbitrary topic without any preparation. To, just sort of denigrate these people because they don't have the same facility with the language that we. I don't know if he's dumb or not. I mean, I don't trust that quick judgment. I really don't. I mean, I want to look at his policies, which I may object to, or his accomplishments, which may be overblown, or his experience and his resume, which is whatever it is, and then I'll take his measure. But this quick judgment about that, I don't know. I mean, I just so how smart was George W. Bush? Smart enough to beat John Kerry in 2004. But I mean, I'm not saying Bush was a great president. I'm just saying, how smart was Ronald Reagan? He's now on Mount Rushmore practically.
Well, so, I mean, there's and you could say that we just fell for voting for a president because we felt really sure. We had this gut reaction that, he's really smart. Obama's so smart. And we were maybe dumb to fall for the idea that we just got these vibes that here's a really smart guy. And that was dumb of us. I agree. I didn't want to go there because it's not polite where I live to say anything that's not nice about the president. But yeah, I mean, how smart is he really? Well, I wasn't saying anything unnice about the president. I want to protect my reputation out here in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm not saying the president isn't smart. I'm saying that the people voted for him because they were so entranced by the mere fact that someone was smart. I mean, I know a lot of smart people around here, and I wouldn't trust them to be president. So there are a lot of smart people with ridiculous ideas and terrible judgment that you wouldn't want to be president. So you don't want to just pick the smartest guy, but you don't want the dumbest guy either. He was the dumbest guy on the stage at the debates. I think when you look at that group of people, when they speak, he seems distinctly less smart than the others.
Yeah. Okay. As I say, I'm not going to try to defend him. And I do think that the Republican establishment, of which I am not a part, do have to wonder, okay, suppose we get behind this guy and it's him and Barack Obama head to head. What's going to happen when they start arguing and debating with each other? Isn't Obama going to make mincemeat of him? He does this in the big time. We're really finished, this kind of thing. So I guess
the deer in the headlights is. I mean, that's what we had with Sarah Palin. You don't want that to happen again.
But I hear now that he is buying a huge advertising buy on Fox News. So he's going to talk right to the main audience, and he's going to try to paper this over with money.
Yeah, and I think that there's I was listening to Rush Limbaugh talking about him yesterday, and I think that there's a clinging to him because there's an idea that we need someone who's the true conservative, and we keep having one in the forefront, and then we lose him. We need someone to be in that slot before we just give up and accept the reality that it's going to be Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
So they don't want to let him go yet, especially as they seem to be losing Cain. I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of a resurgence around Gingrich, or maybe we could bring back
I hear I've been reading all the gossip I hear. But I just want to ask you this. So, Perry went on Letterman. Did you see that?
Yeah, I thought he was charming and endearing. He did a great job.
He was fun. No, come on. He was absolutely good. I said, at first I tried to figure out, is this a Saturday Night Live comedian playing Rick Perry? And I kept looking, and the guy looked so much like Rick Perry. I said, no, they don't have a double that close. And then I realized he's got a real talent. Because that little ditty that he did, 10 Reasons Why I Screwed Up, was the timing, the sort of body language, the facial expression. I mean, it was just right as a kind of performance. So,
I agree. I think
he's obviously got some kind of talent.
Yeah, it might be a little bit similar to what George Bush had, a certain kind of self-effacing charm. I think there are a lot of Americans who like that. They don't like the pomposity. And a lot of people buy the argument that, well, we're not electing someone to debate. It's not about how well you do in debates. And Rick Perry has never done well in debates, so this is a sort of disparaging of the debate mode of choosing a president.
Yeah.
But he's going to have to debate Obama, and Obama's got some experience doing that. He won't look presidential next to Obama, perhaps.
Well, isn't Romney going to be the nominee? Don't we kind of know that? I mean,
yeah.
It
We're
seems
just
highly
playing.
likely to me.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that.
We wait 4 years for one of these events, and we expect there to be some excitement and, not some surprises, a little bit of a narrative arc to it. It can't just all be, I think that's part of why we ended up with Obama last time, is that it seemed like it was written in stone that it was going to be Hillary for the Democrats, and people weren't ready for the story to be over. And then this new storyline popped up, and it was really thrilling, and that changed the whole trajectory of it. That idea that we don't want to be told who the person is.
I got to tell you, I'm going to risk raising your ire by telling you that I like Herman Cain. I can't help it. I like Herman Cain. So,
I like it. No,
so have at me. I've just made my confession. Okay.
No, I want to hear that. I mean, my biggest problem with him is just that he's inexperienced. I can't believe a person can be president with that little experience. So as long as I don't seriously think he's going to get the nomination, I like him too. And whether the current mudslinging undercuts all of that, that's something I want to talk about. I mean, to me, one of the things that I wanted to bring out was just evidence, and when we have evidence and when we don't have evidence. Because in the Penn State case, there was all this evidence and people didn't do anything. In the Cain case, we're dealing in this mushy absence of evidence, and it's having too much effect. I think there's something very disturbing about that. So
do you find much agreement? I mean, I resonate to what you're saying. You're putting into words something that was kind of inchoate. I mean, just a feeling of unease about how these stories were pyramiding and all of that. But what happens so in the legal academy where you reside, is that a widely appreciated view?
That we want evidence and that we stop and say, well, what do we really know?
And that broad public discussions about people who are competing for high office can have substantive effect on the attitudes of the electorate and on the career prospects of a person in the absence of what anybody would recognize to be as evidence. And isn't there an ethical question about, media choices, about, how you position stories, how much time you spend on them and this kind of thing, how much talking you do in the absence of evidence?
Well, I think there's a difference between trying someone in a civil litigation or in a criminal case. You have different burdens of proof. When someone's running for president, you don't have time to go through a whole process like you would if you were litigating about it. And the question, here's someone that's risen so quickly that he hasn't been vetted. Are you going to let people get committed to him and knock out other candidates? I mean, there is a sense of urgency about it. So, I mean, I think there is a reason to go forward with some stories at some point. But I think in this case, those first two stories, those early Politico stories that came out that didn't have not only didn't have names of the accusers, but didn't have any facts. They weren't even any more specific than saying inappropriateness. I didn't know what they were talking about. Quite aside from whether they were true or not, I didn't have any idea what the accusation was. It was just creating a fog around him.
Well, and what I took from that early reporting was that Mr. Cain had been conducting himself over some period of time in a manner that some of the people who encountered him found to be in one way or another objectionable in terms of sexual now innuendo, proposition, suggestion, manner. I mean, it was all very unclear exactly what, but that some people had been made uncomfortable, so much so that his employer, the National Restaurant Association, had to manage a number of sort of personnel cases where the issue revolved in one way or another around people reacting to Mr. Cain.
Right. The number was two.
Now, let me just say, that's not a hanging offense in my mind. I mean, that's the thing that bothered me really was that while we didn't have any evidence, the thing that was being suggested as perhaps not the way that I would want to conduct myself or whatever, it didn't, I didn't even really get exactly what. Now, when they got to the touching part, when somebody came out and said, "Oh, he put his hand here," and they were willing to stand up behind that, I started sitting up a little bit more and said, "Oh, But the idea that someone was made to feel uncomfortable by the way somebody was, that just seems so nebulous and vague of a thing. didn't.
Yeah, and
It was unsettling to me.
The only specific facts that we got about those things that happen in the employment situation, where I think issues of sexual harassment are completely different from when you go out to dinner with somebody that you're not working with, right? The one with the hand on the leg and up the skirt, that involved someone that wasn't his employee, and they had gone out to dinner together, right?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Well,
but she wanted a job, didn't she? That was that was the killer line, right?
Well, that's her side of the story.
When she said stop, he said, "You want a job, don't you?"
But then didn't he stop when he said, okay, so he's accused of having said something about the job. We don't know what tone of voice he said that in, what kind of a dating context that appeared. There were people who were not working together who went out to dinner. And obviously when people go out in a social situation, there's certain kinds of banter that goes on. There's certain kinds of touching that goes on. I don't think that's wrong. I mean, necessarily. I mean, obviously it upset her in some way that she's coming forward. But in a political context where she's piling on after some other things that we don't know the specifics about. I mean, the only thing specific we know about what happened in the employment context, where sexual harassment issues as opposed to sexual assault issues would be arising, was what he said about gesturing that she was the same height as his wife. Now, thinking about what sexual harassment means in the workplace, which is that it creates different working conditions based on sex, I could imagine maybe that is part of some larger pattern in which he's signaling to women that they're different from the men in that I think about them physically. I think about how big they are, what their bodies are like, right? So that really in the workplace, maybe you shouldn't be indicating what you think about other people, but how uptight is a workplace supposed to be? Are you allowed to say, I like your new haircut or what a pretty dress to someone? Is that not permitted?
Well,
but if you do it in a certain way, you could make people feel uncomfortable.
Sure. And I like what you're saying. I think this is exactly the right way to think about it. And supposing that he was making people feel uncomfortable. Well, again, I would say that's not a hanging offense. It's an offense that should be dealt with. And to my mind, those are things that in a properly managed workplace you would be able to bring to the attention of the person who's offended and get them to change their behavior. And if the person persisted willfully or whatever it is, perhaps there would have to be some discipline within the employment relation about that. That's about managing a workplace, and no, you shouldn't have workplaces that are like that. But supposing someone had this particular tick or idiosyncrasy or whatever it was, that's not in my mind disqualifying. I'm sorry. I mean, I just, I just think that's the way some people are. And I mean, okay, if he's a cad, if he's, it's not necessarily attractive. I mean, but when I lay it alongside, I don't know, Newt Gingrich leaving his wife when she's dying of cancer for his secretary or whatever, it's not disqualifying in my mind.
I listened to your dialogue with John McWhorter, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, about Herman Cain before this story broke, and you were talking about Herman Cain's sense of humor being sort of different.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that maybe in the workplace he had a certain kind of personal style, maybe joking or casual speech of a certain type that maybe some people from different cultural backgrounds might think this is too familiar, there's something wrong with this, when really, if we understood it, that's a subjective perspective of it. But from his perspective, I mean, maybe he should, in an authority position, he should alter his behavior so that people don't have that subjective feeling of being ill at ease. But maybe from his perspective, it's just a matter of personal style, and there's nothing bad about it really at all, other than that it has a subjective effect on other people. But maybe it's something like what you were talking about with John McWhorter about the humor and a kind of a way of speaking. It's some part of what makes him charming, part of what we like about him.
Right, a kind of regional, ethnic sort of, pattern or practice or sort of, trait that, exactly, might go along with some of the other things that we like. We don't know. I mean, I don't know this to be the case, but it's not an implausible speculation. And a person might not even be aware of the way in which they are conducting themselves as impacting other people until that's brought to their attention and so on. Again, I don't know this to be the case. We don't yet know. There's going to be this joint news conference, I gather, of the accusing women, or at least now there's speculation that they're trying to organize one.
Right.
And that's going to be an interesting media event. With
if they can get enough people together, the women have to appear as a panel. They want to. The more they bolster each other by saying similar things. but they also give each other strength. I can go out there and say this because other people are saying it too. I mean, that doesn't make it true if everybody who wants to defeat a particular person gets their story straight together and comes forward with similar stories so that it all seems to form a pattern. I mean, they could be generating that pattern by coordinating their stories.
Yeah. Now, we talk about Herman Cain, and I have a complaint, and my complaint is that whereas Herman Cain, an African American, being a darling of an important faction within the Republican Party, is really a startling thing. Mm-hmm. Barack Obama, being an African American, rising to win the nomination in the Democratic Party, while it's historic to be sure, is not nearly so surprising relative to what our ex-ante expectations might have been about what would be possible within that party. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's an event that's unfolding here, it strikes me, as sort of political, cultural event, quite apart from the merits of this candidacy, that wants to be reported on. How is it possible that all these people that we think of, or many of us do, as being racist, or at least friendly toward racist thought, all of these Southerners, all of these conservative Christians, all of these right-wing people, could have as their point of their rallying cry, could really be I mean, when I listen to the Sean Hannity's of the world on the Fox Newses of the world defend this guy, there's real passion that they're bringing to it. So
they really like it.
Yeah, I mean, they love him. I mean, now partly, that's this, it's this, what was it? Ann Coulter says something like, "Our blacks are better than your blacks," which really rubbed me the wrong way. It's very patronizing.
That's a style of humor, right? Speaking of humor, I mean, our blacks are better than their blacks. I mean, it's intended to be kind of, it's a snappy way of putting things. She has a style of humor. If you're grim about it and you hate her, you can use those words against her. So she is exposing herself to that. But I mean, there's been this long hope on the conservative side for the black conservative who will say the right things. As you know, Clarence Thomas, he's beloved. Now, then there's also an effort from the liberal side to say there can't be any people like that. So if anybody steps up to get in that niche, we're going to destroy them. They don't belong there. They're taking advantage of an opportunity that we're not going to let them take. We're going to
but they're very wrong in doing this. I mean, that is the liberals who are, and the liberal blacks who attack Cain as inauthentic or who seek to destroy him because what he represents is somehow, anathema to everything that they believe. I feel they're deeply wrong in doing this because he is authentic. I mean, I'm not saying that all blacks agree with all of his positions, but I know this guy, if you know what I mean. I mean, he is not his posture, his attitude, his sort of general outlook on life is not anything novel to me. I mean, I think it is genuinely reflective of as is Clarence Thomas, for that matter, of an aspect of the African American experience. So I think about the Voting Rights Act debate, and about the issue of who can represent and what does it mean to have African Americans or minority groups adequately represented. Mm-hmm. And what I think to myself is any theory of representation that doesn't credit that Herman Cain is participating as an African American fully in the American political dynamic, and that's kind of what you want out of democracy. You're not prescribing for the minority groups the substance of their political position. What you want is that they are able to engage the institutions and to have their life experience reflected in the dynamic of the political thing. And that's what's happening here, it strikes me. I mean, there's nothing un-black about Herman Cain. I mean, I object strenuously to the assertion that because he has a right-of-center political platform, that somehow can't be reflective of African-American experience. That's just not true in my mind, and I think it's dangerous for us to suppose that.
But from a Democratic Party perspective, there is this effort, I don't know how long they can keep doing it, that black people should vote Democrat, and everyone knows that 90% or whatever the statistic is, the assumption is black people will vote Democrat, and anyone that's trying to say anything other than that needs to be squelched. I mean, that's obviously a Democratic Party message. You can understand that there's some advantage in doing that and keeping doing that. The question is why that when does that message turn into something offensive? Why isn't that more repugnant of a message? And as soon as an attractive face can be put on the alternate message, the conservative message for black people, which Cain seems to represent, that's very threatening to the Democratic Party. So naturally there's a pushback to that, just like there's a pushback to the idea that there could be a conservative woman and that women shouldn't vote Democrat.
I understand that on the level of partisan politics, but again, I asked about the way this is reported on and talked about in the press. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't it be, if Barack Obama running in 2008 is a watershed moment that proves the vitality of our democracy and, you know, the fulfillment of that magnificent promissory note that Martin Luther King talked about, so on and so on? Why wouldn't two black candidates, one representing either of the two major parties competing against each other for the highest office in the land, be like that squared or cubed, you know, a whole nother order of magnitude of, anyway, yeah.
It would be quite, it would be a huge spectacle of
And I'm sorry, right, yeah, I'm saying that the same enthusiasm that people brought on the racial front to the historic nature of Obama's candidacy in 2008, it ought to be available to it generates some enthusiasm and awe at the prospect that an African American could get the Republican nomination, and yet it seems to work for the commentary in quite the opposite direction in Cain's case.
Well, I think that the excitement over that scenario we shouldn't get carried away with it. I mean, we do have to pick someone who can be president, and I think that the level of experience that he has is really, I think, basically disqualifying.
The Herman Cain,
it's very interesting to have him in the debate. He's part of the debate. That's worked in a good way, but once he becomes the front runner, I mean, who do you think dropped the information here? Do you think it came from the Democratic side, or is it one of his opponents, or someone?
I have no way of knowing.
But don't you think the interest from the Democratic side would be to let him get the nomination and then destroy him?
Yes.
The chronology seems to come from the Republican side.
Yeah, so I think that argues in favor of the view that it probably came from the Republican side, given the timing. That I don't have any. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, let's drag in some of our other topics.
Yes,
here.
let's do.
Are we ready to let Cain off the hook now? I wanted to say I don't think Republicans should be too sure that Cain really is the Republican. His inability to state a clear position on abortion that didn't sound actually exactly like the Democrats' position. I think the idea that he's a conservative into the social conservative area is deeply questionable.
And yet, that seems to be where his support is strong, doesn't it? And
I think people are making a mistake. I support abortion rights, so it doesn't trouble me, but I think people who are interested in getting a social conservative ought to wonder whether that they're seeing things in Cain that aren't there.
That may be, and I'm actually not well enough informed about all his views on that. But I note that his religious background may be inoculating him to a certain degree. I mean, he puts out a gospel CD. Is he an ordained minister?
I'll sing on cue.
So he's he can talk that kind of talk, and that may help the social conservatives accept him.
But on the Democratic side, they do the same thing. They say, I think abortion is morally wrong, but it should be legal, for it's the woman's choice. If you say that, that's the liberal position politically. I mean, there are really strong abortion rights people who won't admit that won't say abortion is wrong. Yeah. But in the political sphere, from the liberal side, they always say it's morally wrong, but it should be legal. And that's what I hear Cain saying. Yeah. So I think it's a bit of a fantasy to think he's the social conservative you want him to be. And if he has a freewheeling sex life, maybe he does. That's not too social conservative either, is it?
Keep the safety valve there. Okay, so we're moving on.
Okay, so let's go to, let's hit the streets for Occupy Wall Street. What do you think of these people camping out endlessly on various city streets to try to say whatever they're saying?
So I don't want to be against them because I like that there's some extra extra process activity going on in which people are saying, hold on, the system seems rigged, we're not happy with the way it's going. Now the movement, such as it is, doesn't have the coherence or the focus. There's not a, sort of, you can't articulate a sensible critique. There's not a policy agenda. It's not clear what's supposed to happen. The protest seems inchoate and maybe anarchistic a little bit, and around the edges it's a little grungy, or maybe even more than a little grungy. And as I hear some of the people being interviewed and who are participating, I mean, their motives and whatnot, one could raise questions about, so this is not serious politics. There's something kind of almost adolescent, you could say. On the other hand, my feeling is that the discourse about power and inequality and who gets what kind of help from government and sort of the plutocratic nature of our politics is my dissatisfaction with the sort of shallow level of critique of our system and the kind of, just going along with everything the way it is because that's the way it's been and whatnot is so great that I welcome a little bit of disruption, a little bit of an anarchic thing. I mean, I'm hoping that these people stay out there in the streets long enough to get us really engaged more in some kind of critical discussion about wealth and power in the society. Something like that. I mean, maybe I'm just being naive, myself.
On the subject of wanting to go more deeply into the subject of the interrelationship between wealth and power and politics and finance and so forth, I think that is crucially important. But isn't there something shallow about the way the media cover the protest on the street as opposed to the issue itself? I mean, we could be having great investigative reporting into these issues,
yes,
revealing what these inner workings are. Instead, what we get are just the people who feel bad and worry about what's really going on, but they don't really have any particular information about it or anything other than just their expression of the feeling that they're upset about it. And then the media goes down to cover them, and we get to see their tents and whether they're picking up the trash properly and who's getting a disease and who died next door recently. And it becomes sort of like a Woodstock or the hippie movement or something of that sort. And that makes it so that's it's sort of deep that people are willing to go out there and put their bodies on the line. But there's also something shallow about just watching people putting their bodies on the line. What are really the issues? What's really going on? It kind of ends up being, it calls your attention to something, but it ends up being a distraction simultaneously, paradoxically.
Well, maybe that's the wrong place to look. That is, these youngsters camped out in the streets for the articulation of a deep critique. Maybe some of us in the academy and elsewhere are supposed to be provoked or inspired by that kind of undirected and not especially coherent action into elaborating such a critique. I mean, let me just speak for myself as a member of the economics profession.
Right.
Now, I notice the power that members of my profession have as players in this drama. Both in the business schools and in the economics departments of the universities, but also in the halls of power in Washington, advising government, the Department of Treasury, and the White House, and also in the private sector. And I mean, we are the alchemists who invented all of these, financial instruments and this sort of sophisticated way of thinking about the slicing, dicing, and the managing, spreading around, and the marketing of risk. So we're sort of handmaidens to this. And I watched something like that film documentary, Inside Job. I don't know if you've seen it. I think it's Charles Ferguson. Is that the director's name? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a film. It's a documentary film in the Michael Moore spirit, but I think much, much better done than anything Michael Moore has done on capitalism and finance.
Yeah, I saw Michael Moore's Capitalism movie.
Yeah, no, this is another level above that in terms of the sophistication and the knowledge that the filmmaker brings, a documentary filmmaker brings. I mean, there are a number of scenes in that movie where he's got somebody for a trade association or somebody at one of the banks or somebody at the Columbia Business School or something on the hot seat, grilling them and meeting them, word for word with fact and analysis about what was actually happening. And, a guy will make a claim who's being interviewed that such and such is true, and the interviewer will say, no, it's not. And then he'll go on and explain why what was said was not, you can't really believe that. This kind of, so it's very, very well done. But all I'm saying is, my profession is implicated in the creation of this mess big time. From Larry Summers and Timothy Geithner and Peter Orszag and whatnot gathered around Obama trying to help him figure out what decision to take, to Robert Merton and Myron Scholes and other people who are scholars who get Nobel Prizes and seven-figure incomes from figuring out clever mathematical models of how financial instruments could or might work. And yet, so a disaster befalls us, okay, in terms of financial crisis, protracted recession, bailout things. So huge sums. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars change hands from taxpayers to private. So counterparties get squared away. Banks get kept afloat that might have gone under. Fortunes get preserved that might have otherwise been wiped out. Shareholders get kept in place who might otherwise have been devalued. Haircuts don't get taken on people who are in the queue to get paid off. And all of this goes down. And we're right there. I mean, I'm talking about the economics profession. So now, in the aftermath of this, when there are deep ethical, not to mention legal critiques, but deep ethical critiques about whether or not the order of things is right, just, and proper, we are completely silent. I'm talking about the economics profession. We're completely unreflective. I know of no major piece in any of the journals in which the point has been, what is revealed about the intellectual inadequacy of this grand edifice that we've constructed? A, that we didn't understand, anticipate, and protect against what was happening, and B, that we have no kind of philosophical or normative, Hippocratic oath type constraints on the way we practice our profession. I mean, are there no implications for our responsibility in the aftermath of this debacle? So anyway, to the extent that we don't respond, I'm talking about we economists now, to be specific, to Occupy Wall Street by changing our intellectual agendas, redoubling taking a good long look at ourselves, asking some questions that we might not otherwise have asked before. I mean, for me, it's a bit like when the Enron accounting type scandals force business ethics to become a major item on the curriculum of the business schools. Some comparable kind of evolution of the practice of economic science ought to be implied by what we've gone through, and to the extent that something like Occupy Wall Street gets a guy like me thinking in that direction, I think, that's,
so it sounds
worthwhile.
like it sounds like the protests themselves have a moral message. In other words, you feel they're shaming.
Yes, that's it. That's a good way of putting it.
They're expressing, they're
making
it harder to turn away, to cover up the outrage. In other words, as long as they're willing to sit out there, you still have to have this guilt or shame nagging at you. And that's really what's going on. I mean, I was thinking that they were inspired by what happened in Egypt, and there was kind of a revolutionary spirit that obviously is so far from the mainstream of the United States that it's ineffectual, but that there were a lot of people who were kind of getting pretty far down into a delusion that if they just stayed in the street long enough, things would magically change the way they wonderfully and magically changed in Egypt, because people just stayed in the street long enough. But the way you're presenting it sounds much more real, which is that people putting their bodies out there on the line, like people in other eras, civil rights movement and so forth, they create something that you can't turn away from, just in the sense of feeling guilty, feeling responsible, feeling that something ought to be done, and it has a moral power because of the visual and because there are real people that put their bodies on the line.
Yeah, I think that's very well put, and that's exactly. I hadn't quite seen it, but it is shaming. I mean, it's like the power of, the Buddhist monk who sets himself aflame in some Southeast Asian hamlet, or that fellow in Tunisia, the street vendor who set himself on this kind of, or the hunger striker in India, the one who's advocating for the end of all the corruption in government agencies and so forth, and who has had a measurable impact on the discourse. Right, the willingness to endure this kind of physical privation and whatnot. So if they're out there in the wintertime, if they're still, there are cases of frostbite. I'm not asking for this. I'm just saying.
Or tuberculosis. They're getting tuberculosis now.
Oh.
Did you see that?
No, I did not hear that.
Tuberculosis has broken out in one of these places, and there's something called Zuccotti lung.
Oh, that's very troubling.
Yeah, I mean, there really is a health problem at some point. So to say, hey, look, you people have to stay out there because if you want this to work, I think at some point these are young people. They really are making themselves seriously ill. And I mean, a problem that I have with the Occupy Wall Street protests as opposed to Tea Party protests and even the Wisconsin protests that we had here last winter that I saw a lot of in person is that it's structured so that there's no end. There's no exit strategy. It has to go on and on. It's supposed to build. So the people who commit to it, who put a lot of time in it, put their bodies on the line, they have to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And I'm afraid, especially with young people who have sleep deprivation and who are in a groupthink kind of a situation, that they may actually lose their minds to some extent, and that they feel like we have to just keep doing this. But there needs to be a graceful way to end it and to say, you really did do something, and let's have a big rally, and then we'll go home and we'll do something next, because otherwise it becomes a downward spiral. And who is left? Just people who have kind of lost their minds, or people who were really homeless already, or who are the evildoers who are taking advantage of people, or people who are just very hardcore left-wing revolutionary anarchist types who are not really the best conveyors of the message to the general run of American people. So I think there needs to be, there's a flaw in the dynamic of the type of protest, that it doesn't have an end to it.
I see the point. Yeah, you can't back down, and yet there's no natural closure. Though maybe they're just supposed to stay out there until something else happens. Maybe. I mean, if you're told the early guys on the sit-ins, the freedom riders on the bus, how does this end? I mean, they would just say, we're going to do this. This is the right thing to do.
But they had a very specific thing that they need. There was, segregation needed to be ended. Okay. That was very clear. You make people feel, yes, we have to stop doing this. All right,
no, you're
stop.
Right.
You change a rule. You change a law. That's a very specific goal.
You're
this
right.
idea of unwinding the financial, political power structure, how do you even start to do that? It's not like, okay, we could pass this law and that could be done. I just don't see how you get your demand met. It's not that straightforward.
Yeah, you persuade me. There is a dilemma there.
Well, yeah, I would like to try to help people get respect for what they did so far, and to find a way to end this phase and then go on to something else before too many people get sick or die, or there's too much violence, and then the whole thing seems to have gone bad, as if the good things that were done don't count. And I worry about also just the well-being of young people. And I think some of them who are drawn into it, everybody goes into a group thing for their own personal reasons. And I think some people are maybe a little mentally unstable, or become more unstable with sleep deprivation and with being talked to by people who think all sorts of things all day long. I ran into some people here in Wisconsin, and there were some overnight they held on to the state capitol for a while here, and some of the people there were really, a little deranged. I mean, there were lots of different kinds of people, but it becomes a magnet for lots of people who are lost or searching in some way.
Right.
And then as illness and sleep deprivation and cold and deprivation of different sorts sets in, I just think there needs to be a way to move forward to the next phase. I would like to see people.
You're very persuasive on this, sort of institutionalizing OWS, Somebody somewhere ought to be at the Ford Foundation, as Soros or somebody, ought to be thinking hard about exactly how to do that. A little money probably would help, but also leadership would, intellectual leadership.
But then they have an anti-leadership. They don't have enough. They're specifically experimenting with not having leaders and with using a completely decentralized approach.
Something
utopian in that view.
Something more should come of it. It's worth thinking about. Let's talk about Joe Paterno.
Thinking about
and
power structures and authority. Yeah, power structures and authority, and things that don't come to an end when they should, and how much evidence there is for something. Let's talk about the Penn State, and also demonstrations. You saw that when they fired Joe Paterno
as the
Penn State coach, there was an instant riot, and it completely boiled over.
I saw it got violent.
That was the ultimate protest.
I saw they were turning over vehicles and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was shocked. I mean, of course, the facts are very shocking of what appears to have happened there over a period of time. The institutional failure, the of being able to respond to this predator in their midst and not responding, and the personal failures of the individuals all the way up to the president of the university who didn't take action, and then this sort of cult of personality around Coach Joe Paterno and the student support for him, even though clearly it would appear that he let them down by not exercising his enormous responsibilities with greater, doing it better than he did. I had my Rick Perry moment there. You see, I couldn't find the word, but believe me, people, I'm not as dumb as I may have just sounded.
Well,
anyway,
what I'm trying to get my mind around here is how can you have evidence of someone who you trust, McQuarrie, who was a graduate assistant and I think had been a football star before, he was a trusted individual, had seen Sandusky anally raping a 10-year-old in the showers. He saw it.
Yeah.
How can you cover that? I mean, it's not like a story that the football players were out at a party and some woman said that that there was involuntary sexual whatever. I mean, it's just so stark. Eyewitness, a child, anal rape. I mean, how can you not? And then there had been previous stories as well. There had been eyewitnesses in other situations.
Yeah.
How can you have that much evidence and think maybe we could handle this internally and just exclude him from the university or do something a little more considerate of his great reputation and preserve the school's reputation? How could they not? I mean, it's just so extremely beyond the line where it's obvious that this man needs to be imprisoned and that the boy needs to be saved immediately when you encounter something like that. I just can't understand how people could at all get into the position where they reacted the way they did.
Well, far be it for me to help you understand that. I haven't got any greater insight. I can only imagine, however, that the desire to protect the individual and the institution as they saw it protect overcame their moral revulsion at what was being done and a sense of, sort of righteous indignation and, that he should be punished, that some retribution should take place. That was overwhelmed by a desire to, we feel sorry for the guy, he's sick, something like that.
Or he's such a great guy,
and
we love this
and also
guy.
the feeling that no one was going to find out. They must have believed that this wouldn't come to light. And I'm wondering, and how did it come to light? There was a grand jury. There must have been a long investigation.
There was a long investigation.
I'm wondering, how did it come to light? Was there someone inside of the Penn State hierarchy who had gone to the authorities? Do you know? I just simply don't know.
Well, I noticed in the New York Times article about this, I was reading last night, said that there was that the grand jury. This is the last line of an article that was in the New York Times about the role of the Pennsylvania governor Tom Corbett in forcing the Paterno and Spanier, the president of the university, out. That one of the last lines in this New York Times article that was out yesterday was the grand jury indictment had been filed under seal, but because of a computer glitch, it had mistakenly been public. So this all wasn't it. That's just dropped at the end of the New York Times article, and that's the only time I saw that. But it seems like this was all being dealt with by the grand jury over a period of years as well, and that everything suddenly came out because of a computer glitch.
Yeah, but even the grand jury's investigation and the prosecutors looking into the case, how did that come to be?
I think
how did the authorities even know about this? If Paterno didn't tell anybody, except the athletic director or the president of the university?
Well, all the kids knew.
Sorry, say it again.
A lot of people, the kids knew what happened to them.
Yes,
How come
indeed,
they
they
didn't
did, right.
Speak earlier? It seems like an awful lot of silence was procured among an awful lot of people. To me, the greater question is, why didn't it come out before? How could you suppress this much for so long? I mean, it's been going on since the 90s, including an earlier arrest that wasn't prosecuted. And then did you see that the prosecutor who didn't prosecute when it was reported in 1998 went disappearing and was declared dead
Yeah,
recently, even though his body is
I
never
heard that
been
comment that he died under mysterious circumstances. He disappeared, and his computer was then found thrown in the river with the hard drive separated from the rest of the computer and discovered in another location. This is what I heard reported. So we can, we could write the novel. We've got all the makings for a Pelican Brief type, mystery here.
Yeah.
God only knows what actually happened. I guess we'll find out in due
Yeah,
course.
I was thinking about it novelistically just in terms of McQuarrie witnessing what he saw, then deciding not to intervene, not to call the police
To
then,
stop it at
but
the
to
time.
go home, speaking of patriarchy and whatever these authoritarian structures are within the world of universities and football, go home, talk to his father, and then the two of them had a conversation. They then decided to sleep on it, and then the next day they went in and I think talked to Paterno at that point. That's the allegation. But I mean, I was thinking, if I wanted to write a fictional account of this, what would I have the father and son say to each other? What were they talking about? How did they decide? You're trying to protect his future career? What did they say about all the good work that Sandusky has done with his charity Second Mile, and maybe there's something about these kids that they're actually benefited in some way? Did they think about it in those kind of ancient Greek NAMBLA sort of terms about older men and younger and their mentees?
I mean,
what was in that conversation? I mean, if you were fictionalizing and you were creating the scenario in which the boy decides to talk to his father, number one, they have a conversation, and then they sleep on it and then go in and talk to his boss the next day. What do they talk about? What is in that conversation?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Scriptwriter would have a lot of fun with that.
I mean, I don't know how I would flesh that out. I would have to. It's sort of like what if you were writing a novel about a murderer, and there's a series of horrendous murders. Maybe you read a news report about. Now you want to tell the story, and you have to flesh out what the murderer thought. So you have to get inside the sort of evil mind and give substance.
Well, you're reminding
what
me
would you put in there?
of Dostoevsky. Crime and Punishment. Inside Raskolnikov's head. Some of the most brilliant passages in that novel are precisely this kind of psychological imagining.
Right.
So
because this is a real case where it's sort of like, I can't understand how the people did what they did. And these were respected, admired people who must have thought they were good people, right? Paterno, and they're running a university. There are a lot of people involved. They talked among themselves and decided this was the right way to handle it. How does that really happen? I mean, it reminds me a little of what you were saying before about the economists and obviously the economic and politics problems that we have are different from the sexual rape of children.
Here's what I think.
But this idea that you could be involved in an elaborate system of evil and think that you're still doing it properly and still have self-respect and be able to carry on and justify it to yourself and all of the people around you. How do human beings do that?
It's brilliant. I think the question you ask is just right. I was just going to say, add to this a small footnote, which is, this is a hyper-macho culture. A top-rate football program? Mm-hmm. There's testosterone dripping off the walls in those locker rooms. Mm-hmm. Okay? So here you have sodomy, buggery, anal sex, homosexuality. Okay? Not that it's known amongst all the players and that it, sort of permeates their interactions and so forth, but that it is, I don't know, somehow, if I were to say accepted, that's the wrong word. I don't know that they accepted, but they certainly countenanced. They certainly covered up or failed to react with the degree of revulsion that you would think macho man would feel if he were to see this kind of sexuality being played out. So does it not? Is there not another kind of subtext here about something about that sort of I don't know what the right words are these days, homophobia or the hypocrisy that's been, or something about people being sick in their thinking about sex and sexuality.
Well, you could say, some people would say there's homoerotic themes or whatever in football.
Yes.
But one thing about football is you are training young people to deal with having forceful, shocking things done to their body and to endure it, to deal with it, right? And it maybe if you're training young people to do that, there's like an element of the sort of perversion of that in the mind that would see, forcing yourself sexually on a young person as being training them, toughening them up for this football enterprise that we're doing. Or just sort of like a fantastical. I mean, I was talking about how people in Occupy Wall Street might become delusional at some point, that it might stimulate a side of them that really is not appropriate and is not what the protest is about. But they could go into that maybe a man who started working with children and had the experience with naked men in the locker room and so forth could just kind of burst into a sort of a zone of madness for himself. I'm trying to be like Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment, but wouldn't you, if you were trying to embody how a man could be like this, there's something about the whole environment of football and working with the young people and getting them to accept this brutality to their bodies. That is the sport. What is the attraction of all of that? Now, I know one thing I'm doing, and I want to say this. I'm just speculating with this. I was reading an article in the New York Times this morning that was trying to take the Penn State case and expand it more generally into the issue of, something corrupt about football per se, or that football players engage in sexual violence, and connecting it to some cases of suppressing or handling internally cases of football players who are accused of rape or other kinds of sexual misdeeds with adult women. So that's obviously completely different from doing things to children. And then the homosexuality is another issue altogether, what's going on there. But there is a bit of a trend that I'm seeing in that New York Times article to take the Penn State story and view it as leveraging this issue that some people have wanted to promote. We're sort of back to the pre-Duke lacrosse days, where the college sports characters are these over masculinized men, and they deal in violence, and the university condones it, et cetera, et cetera. There's that angle to it. I mean, the alternative is to say Sandusky is one crazy, bizarre person who did something just beyond the pale. So is it part of a larger whole, or is it some extreme, monstrous thing that once happened? Yeah. I mean, one thing that might lead you to say it's part of the whole system of university sports is the way the university, in fact, dealt with it. How were they able to assimilate it and deal with it internally, unless it was part of something that seemed normal to them because of other things that were going on?
Well, I'm nominating Oliver Stone to make the movie. Do you know Any Given Sunday?
I know that it's a movie, but I didn't see it.
It's a terrific football film, in my opinion, from Oliver Stone that does probe a little bit at some of this kind of psychodrama of the violence and the sort of character of football as a sport, as a practice, as a cult, and all of the extracurricular stuff that is implied by that. And it sort of follows these guys off the field. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Anyway, I think we should terminate our conversation now.
Okay. All right. Well, that's right. We hit the hour mark, and I hope that can splice it together when we had our phone call problem.
Yeah, they'll probably be able to manage that. Nice talking to you as always, Ann.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.